Hi, it's Dr. Heather Wanish with Feather Communications, and I'm so excited that you're joining me today on my webinar, The Top 10 Tips to Create an Effective Resume. So what we'll be doing today is going through a presentation regarding my top 10 tips. There's a lot more, but these are the most important ones in my opinion. After that, if you have any questions, you can definitely check out the last slide, which does have my email address on there, as well as my phone number, because please remember that I do always offer free resume reviews, and I would be happy to help you with your upcoming new resume. So we are going to share the screen here, and we will get started. Okay. So like I said, my name is Dr. Heather Wanish, and my company is Feather Communications. I actually am a certified professional resume writer, so I do have a designation. My big joke is that it's not a designation that you just purchase. You do have to take a test, and there are 3 judges that judge the resume and cover letter that you make for a mock client. I am a member of the Professional Association of Resume Writers and Career Coaches, as well as the National Resume Writers Association. I've spoken on a couple of industry conferences, and I've actually written probably over 2,000 resumes at this point for people in a variety of fields. And the most interesting thing to me has been that no matter if somebody is a bus driver, a college professor, a nurse, a marketing professional, or a pharmaceutical sales representative, most people have the same issues with their resume. They have a really hard time writing about themselves and determining kind of where to draw that line in the sand about what to include and what not to include. So this will kind of tell you some of that information today. So here's just some statistics for you. A recruiter or hiring manager spends only about 5 to 7 seconds reviewing your resume on the first pass through. That certainly doesn't mean that they're reading the whole thing. It means a quick scan. If you end up having a resume that has tons of text all over, it looks very difficult to read, they're going to pass it over. You really need to be cognizant of the fact that they don't spend a lot of time on the first pass through. There is competition out there, so you have to keep that in mind. Most of you are applying online these days. In fact, everybody is. So you have to keep in mind that there are a lot of other applicants probably vying for the same position. How are you going to make your resume stand out? And in all honesty, one grammar mistake, one spelling mistake can be the difference of going to the maybe I'll call that person pile to the no pile. They are always looking for a way to weed people out, not a way to weed people in. So the first impressions are critical. Most people think you're writing a resume to get a new job, and it's true to a certain extent because that is definitely the end goal. But the resume, the goal of that particular document is to get an interview. Most of the time, at least with the clients that I work with, they consistently say, if I could just get to the interview, I know I could sell myself. But if your resume can't even get you to that point, how are you going to be able to sell yourself during an interview? Or how are you even going to get that interview in the first place? So you have to think about it that way as well. You really need to grab the attention of the employer. You really need to try to make an impression and really stand out. And the other thing that you can definitely do is really show the company that you've researched them. You can do that with the resume and cover letter, and really understand their business and use the same types of verbiage that they use. And we'll talk about that when we talk about keywords. So here we go with our tips. So tip number 1 is get organized. I can't tell you how often I work with a client that says, oh, I'm not sure where my old resume is. I can't remember the exact days or months that I started at this particular job, all sorts of things. So to me, it doesn't really matter if it's hard copy, electronic copy, a folder that you keep, whatever the case might be. Keep all that information in the same spot. If it was me, my recommendation would actually be to do both. Keep hard copies maybe in a file cabinet of your resumes, your transcripts, your degrees, your skill sets, anything, good that comes from a client, an email, testimonial. Keep all of that. Keep hard copies of it, and then keep an electronic copy as well. We all know that hard copies get lost, and we also all know that sometimes computers flake out on us. You lose a flash drive, who knows? So the moral of the story is better to be safe than sorry in that instance. And one of the things I like to include on this slide, and I know it's a little strange for a lot of us to think about, but it's like make a list of your skills, your abilities, and your qualifications. Because anytime you can make that list, when it comes time to answer that interview question, tell me about your strengths, tell me your favorite parts of working at your job. That's where you can glean some of that information from. Tip number 2, and this is actually a two-slide tip, is decide on a format. So most of you probably have what we call a chronological resume, a reverse chronological, meaning that we put the most recent job position first, and then we work our way backwards. And we'll talk a little bit about how far back to go as well in a little bit. This is a really good and the most common type of resume format because it really showcases, I've worked here from 2005 till today. From 2001 to 2005, I worked at ABC Company. Here's what I did. Here's my accomplishments. This works really well, especially if you've been established at companies for quite some time. It also works well when you don't have a lot of different gaps in your employment history. It can emphasize your age too much, and that's why we'll talk about how far back to go, and it can reflect those gaps, which a lot of people do have in their work history because companies lay people off, they close, people move, there's a whole variety of reasons. The other type of format is actually a functional format. This is actually when we kind of lump all of our skills together. So let's say that you were an accountant for your first 10 years of professional experience, and then you went back to school and you got a marketing degree, and now you're in sales. So in that case, that person may want to put all of his or her accounting skills together and then have a separate section that focuses on those marketing skills, and then kind of go into the job history. The only issue with this is sometimes, and not as much recently, I don't think, but sometimes in the past, people use this type of format to hide things. They hid the fact that maybe they took 5 years off from work, or they only worked at this job for 3 months, this job for 6 months, and this one for another 6 months. Because you're not really focusing on the dates, you're focusing on those skill sets. Now, that's not to say that you can't use a combination of the chronological and functional format, but just keep in mind if you have a choice, definitely go with the chronological. That's what recruiters prefer, that's what hiring managers prefer, and that's what online application systems prefer as well. So tip number 3 is remember the ATS, which is the Applicant Tracking System or the Applicant Tracking Software. So when you're applying online, a lot of times you're entering all of this information and then you're attaching your resume and you click submit. And I like to think that it just goes poof into this big abyss and you have no idea what happens to it. So this is what happens to it. As those resumes are coming in, hundreds of them, 50, whatever the case might be, especially larger organizations are using this software to scan the incoming resumes. And then people say, well, what are they scanning for? They're scanning for keywords. So for example, in a job posting, when it says qualifications include, and then there's a bulleted list of 10 items, those are the keywords. So if it says must have cross-functional teamwork abilities, cross-functional teamwork is a keyword. If it says must have project management experience, project management, those are keywords, those are key phrases. So the closer that you can align with the words that are used in the job posting, the better odds that you have of getting through this system and getting to the hiring manager's desk. Again, keep in mind the software is designed to weed people out, not weed people in, and it saves the company time and money. If they're getting 100 or 200 resumes for a particular position, think of the time, effort, money that goes into paying somebody to sit there and go through all of them. What if they could cut that time in half by using this type of software? and that's what companies do. So really, really be cognizant, again, of those keywords, of the skills they're asking for, and use those in your resume. I typically use them towards the top of the document, and I'll give you an example in a couple of slides here of what they can possibly look like. So if you don't remember anything else from today's webinar, this is one of the big ones. Lose the objective. If you're sending out a resume and it still has an objective on the top, it appears old, because in the past we were always told to put an objective on there. My objective is to get a position with a company where I can learn and grow my skills and blah, blah, blah. Eventually, that's kind of what it sounds like. Your objective is to get a job. Your objective is to get an interview. Otherwise, why are you sending this resume in the first place? That's how I look at it. So what do you put there instead? Is a career summary. So there's an example on your screen right now, and I realize this looks extremely long. I will tell you that once it's written out in a Word document, it's probably 3 to 5 lines, depending upon how long you've worked and sort of your career history. But the point is that this, once again, because it's at the top of the document, and number 2, because it's a little bit longer, you can really hone in on those keywords. So here you can see investment analysis, strategic planning, employer initiative. Those are areas that we can switch out and modify the words depending upon where we're sending the resume. So get rid of the objective. There's so many other things that we can better utilize that space for. So add a skills section. So on the resumes that I make for my clients, at the top, I have that career summary, like we just saw. Immediately after that, we put a skills section on here. It doesn't matter if you call it skills, qualifications, core competencies, areas of expertise. It really doesn't matter what you call it. It's your skills area. This is the perfect section to use those keywords. So you can, a lot of times people will list them out kind of in a vertical format. The problem with that is it really takes up a ton of space on your resume, and you can use something like this to make it a lot easier, but to still really pepper that area with lots and lots of different skills. So there's just 2 examples. These both happen to be called core competencies. Again, skills, qualifications, whatever you want to call it. But you can easily go in this section and modify it depending upon the job that you're applying to. So it's really a wonderful way to do that. And I will say, like, you can kind of see it, especially in the lower one, it says training and mentoring. If you're reading a job posting and it says must be able to train staff members, then put train staff members. The other thing that I would caution you with, and I'm sure you've all heard different stories about people who lie on their resume, and yes, people do that, only list those skills that you can really effectively back up during a job interview. You don't want to go to a job interview where you've listed project management as a skill and you've never done it, and they say, oh, give me an example of a 3 to 6 month project that you've managed, and you have nothing to back that up. So as much as we do want to match the keywords in the job posting, keep in mind that it needs to be within reason, and you need to be able to back up whatever you're putting on here during an interview situation. Tip number 6 is to list varying experiences. Now, just because we might call a section, work experience or professional history, doesn't mean that it needs to be paid. Now, this is especially true for like a college student. A lot of times college students are working part-time jobs just to get by, to get some extra cash. They don't have a ton of professional history, but maybe what they do have are 2 internships that were at these amazing companies and they learned fantastic skills. Those internships can be considered professional experience. Maybe you've worked on a really well-known committee for your local Chamber of Commerce. And if your Chamber of Commerce is a big deal in your area, then absolutely list that as a professional experience. And another thing is you don't have to list all of the experiences that you have ever had. My example is I was a bank teller in high school. High school was a while ago, and honestly, if I was applying for a job these days, it doesn't really matter because it was so long ago. So I wouldn't even include that on there. However, if I was applying to be a bank teller now, or even maybe work at a credit union or a bank, I would put that on there just because it shows I've already worked in a financial institution. I might not include the dates because I don't want to date myself, but just keep in mind that you really have to be smart about the job that you include. And one of the things you can do is you can call that section related professional history or selected work experience, something to indicate that this isn't everything that I've ever done, but this is definitely a good representation, and this is what is in line with that particular job opportunity. Tip number 7 is to discuss achievements. Everybody has a job description, hopefully, and if you read job descriptions, a lot of times somebody at another company that does what you do will have a really similar sounding job description. So really focus on those achievements and not just your responsibilities in your job description. A lot of times that's really boring. So one of the things that I know this kind of sounds flippant, but sometimes I ask clients, well, who cares and why does it matter? That's how you have to think about this. So you manage projects. Okay, well, so do a lot of people. Oh, you managed a $3 million project over a 2-year period. That's a big deal. So any time that you can include percentages, numbers, dollar amounts, numbers of employees that you manage, maybe number of new clients that you were able to secure, that's really, really important. Some jobs, it's easier to focus on those quantitative measurements than others. For example, if you're a sales professional, likely you know a lot of your numbers and you're able to pull that information out. If you're an elementary teacher, it's a little bit more difficult, but maybe you can say worked in a 1,200 student school, managing 35 students within the classroom, etc. Think creatively, not making information up, but as much as you can focus on your achievements and your accomplishments, it's so much better than just listing your job duties. And it's more interesting too. All right, tip number 8. Now, I like to call this community engagement because that's how I see it, but it's volunteerism. This is a section that I think is optional on your document. If you have room and it applies to the job that you're seeking, great. If you don't have room or you haven't had time to volunteer with organizations, don't worry about it. Another way you can look at this section too is like professional groups. If you're a member of a professional association or an affiliation, this is another place you can put that information. So if you are on a board of directors and you've managed projects or oversaw budgets, that could be important. I know that earlier I mentioned the Chamber of Commerce. If your Chamber of Commerce is super strong in your area and you're very involved, absolutely put that on the document. If you led a group of 50 volunteers, if you fundraised $50,000 for the last cancer event that was in your area, whatever the case might be, think about it. Think about if it's relevant to the job that you're seeking and if other people where you're applying will recognize that information. If it is, great. Or if the company you're applying for is super involved with the community and really focuses on giving back, if you have any of that volunteerism, it'd be a great time to include it. Now, this is another section that sometimes when I present it, people think, why would you put a testimonial on here? Now, again, this is only if you have room. I definitely wouldn't add a second page for it or anything like that. But if you have room, maybe on the bottom of your first page, or if your document goes to 2 pages, but you've got kind of this funny white space at the end, and you have a written testimonial or endorsement from somebody, consider adding that. And I don't mean, something half a page long. I'm talking a sentence, maybe 2 at the absolute most. And obviously checking with the person that you can include that as well. But if you have a really nice testimonial or kind of a kudos from somebody, you can include a line or 2 of that. And what I like to do is kind of bold the important words that would be vital to that particular job. I also am very cautious about who I include on there. A lot of times I'll only include maybe a first name with a last name initial. If it's somebody that's very well known in the area and you know that other people know this person, maybe include the whole name just to show kind of who you're connected to. but this is another way to kind of make your information stand out a little bit more. And think about dates. This is so important. I would say if you're over the age of about 40 and there's no kind of line in the sand to say, oh, after this age, you really have to think about it. There is no particular age. But what I like to tell people is I include about the last 10 to 15 years of job history. So if you've been working for 30 or 40 years, we don't necessarily need to include those earlier jobs. And if we do, we probably will put them in a separate section that says earlier career history, and we won't put the date on there. Age discrimination is real and it does happen. A lot of times there'll be, kind of other reasons supposedly that a company doesn't call you. But if they know that you're over a certain age, they may decide that they don't want to call you. So you don't have to list every job back to high school. You can just list the years. You don't have to list the months, especially if you've been kind of a job hopper in the past. Again, not through any fault of your own, but sometimes it happens. And keep in mind that education doesn't need a date. At some point when you start to say you graduated from college, 25, 30 plus years ago, people start to date you again as well. And this is just cautionary. I'm not saying any of this is right or how it should be, but this is what happens. So really, really be smart about the dates that you're including on your document. Some formatting tips. So use a readable and common font. Calibri is the default, and I'm guessing most of you are using Microsoft Word. Calibri is a great font to use. Everybody has it. There's no worries about it. Currently, any resume using different formats, of course, but I always use Calibri because it's common. Everybody has it. You don't have to worry a lot about formatting issues. Don't use big blocks of paragraphs on your resume. People start to tune out that information when they see big blocks of text. Use spell check, use grammar check. Make sure you're speaking in the proper tense on your document. And don't get cutesy with clip art. Don't include, pictures and different things and pink color and red color and blue. The thing is a lot of times that doesn't go well through those applicant tracking systems. And unless you're applying, at a place where that's pretty common, you really don't want to do that. The resume is a professional document, needs to look professional and be business oriented, okay? And one other thing about spell check and grammar check, I will say, is that they're great and they work. However, they don't work 100% of the time. So I had a client in the past where he had listed customer service skills as one of his skills, but it actually said customer services skills. And it is kind of funny, but if he had sent that out, it's like, oh my goodness. But the thing is spell check's not going to catch that because all of those words are spelled correctly. So my personal recommendation would be to print your document out and have somebody else look at it. Because a lot of times when it's your information, your eyes just start to fix things and you don't notice misspellings and things that sound strange. But having somebody else look at it with fresh eyes will allow those things to better be found. And if you don't feel comfortable having somebody else do it, print it out and actually read it backwards, word for word for word, because that's another way that you can catch things that normally you wouldn't. Don't use the word I. Focus on the employer, talk kind of in the third person. Don't use abbreviations, or at least for the first instance, don't, because a lot of times those applicant tracking systems and online systems won't understand that. And my personal one is I just like to keep the resume kind of even on the page. So even amount of white space on the side and the top and the bottom. Resumes really are your chance to be you, and it really is your time to shine. So don't be afraid to put those accomplishments on there. Don't feel like you're bragging, because I can guarantee you if you're not putting your achievements on there, somebody else is, and that person's going to get the interview. Make sure you follow all the directions of the prospective employer. Think of this as the first step. If you can't follow the directions in this process, how are you going to be able to follow directions and guidelines if you work there? And if you can, really research the employer and kind of tailor the information towards that organization. So if you do have questions, I encourage you to email me or call me. My email address is on this slide, and my phone number is on there as well. I always offer free resume reviews, and I would absolutely be happy to look at yours. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. So I really appreciate you joining me today. I hope that you were able to learn some fantastic information about resumes. And like I said, I would be happy to help you now or in the future. So once again, it's Heather with Feather Communications. Thank you, and I really appreciate you joining me today. Bye-bye.